All right, I want to talk about setting up a malware lab and why you might want to set up a malware lab. First of all, I always get asked this question, like, where can I get malware samples if I want to analyze malware samples? There's a couple of different places. The Malware Zoo is a really popular place where you can get malware samples. If you just Google Malware Zoo, you'll see the website that comes up. It's a GitHub website. There it is right there. The Malware Zoo. There's actually multiple Malware Zoos. So if you Google Malware Zoo, you'll actually get multiple websites. But this is the main one people talk about, but there's a lot of ones that are out there. And you can download a lot of different malware samples. There's also another site called The Zoo. There's a URL out there with a lot of different malware samples. One of my favorite websites is called VX Underground. The reason I like VX Underground is because they actually have some of the latest malwares out there with some of the latest threats. So the threats that you're hearing about today, the threats that you hear about in the news, they've actually been able to get those threats, and you can get those threats. So why would you want those threats? Well, if you're trying to learn the skills on how malware works and how to analyze malware, you're going to need to analyze that malware. And so why not analyze some of the latest threats or some of the most well-known threats? Just a couple other things. Another website that's a nice website for threat researchers is to go to VirusBay. VirusBay is very similar to VirusTotal, and I will bring up, you can also go to VirusTotal. We've talked about that in the past as well. But VirusBay is a little easier access, a little more affordable. It is also a commercial website. Or I believe if you have an invitation, they have free accounts out there as well. The last website I would like to talk to you about is one of my favorites, and of course there's a lot of them out there. This is just a small sample, but a lot of them, one of my favorites is called Polyswarm. The reason I like Polyswarm is because they make it very easy for researchers to interact with other researchers. So not only is it a site where researchers, like the other sites where they can share virus and malware samples, but they can actually, it has almost a social media platform where you can speak with other researchers as well through like Discord or through Slack channels, or just through some of their forums as well. So very, very good site. I recommend checking at least all of these out if you're going to do any type of research. Also, the good thing about these sites, at least some of them, these sites, Polyswarm in particular, is if you do have malware you want to upload and you want to test to see what the results of the malware is versus other vendors, you can do that with Polyswarm as well. Now, I always get asked this question a lot too, is because most malware sites, VX Underground being a notable exception, but most malware sites have old samples, and they're like, hey, isn't that a problem? There is a misconception that, like, to analyze malware and to get good at analyzing malware, you have to have the newest and latest malware. It's always nice, like, why not? But but it really doesn't make a difference. Like, if you want to study malware analysis, you don't need the latest, greatest malware. And that's because the techniques and strategies for analyzing malware really haven't changed in a few years. If you're going to analyze ransomware, it's the same thing as analyzing ransomware from a year ago to even really 2 years ago. Yeah, before that, things started changing a little bit, but it's pretty easy. When we talk about old ransomware samples or old malware samples, we're normally talking about saying things that are 6 months old, or maybe a year old at max. So when we talk about old, our timelines are a little different. Our point of view is a little different with malware because there's so much malware out there. So just remember, some of the strategies and techniques don't change. Absolutely okay to look at some older things. And I do like even looking at some classical malware, what I say classical malware, because I like to see how things change. And it's a good stepping stone and building block on figuring out how advanced malware has gotten. So it helps you kind of build up your strategies in a very linear and predictable way. As you start analyzing malware, you're going to start developing your own techniques and using the tools that you feel like you are more comfortable with. That's okay. You're basically going to develop your own way of analyzing malware. All right, so why study malware analysis and why build a lab? Well, if you want to understand computer threats, most threats happen through malware, so you're going to have to understand at least some malware. If you want to really further pursue a goal of reverse malware engineering, so that's beyond an analyst, that's beyond the CISA Plus exam. But if you do want to go further in your career and become a reverse malware engineer, well, malware analysis is the first step of becoming a reverse malware engineer. And lastly, during this course, we talked a lot about incident response and digital forensics. If you want to really enhance your skills doing digital response and digital forensics, incident response and digital forensics, I think you should definitely learn malware analysis. So why study malware analysis versus reverse malware engineering? Well, let me give you an example. Malware analysis is really the study of observing malware, of running that malware, of examining like network artifacts, like in other words, what that malware is actually connecting to, the network connections that it makes. And it also includes dynamic analysis, which means running the malware in a contained environment. Now let's talk about the difference what reverse malware engineering is, or malware reverse engineering is, depending on how I've written it down, I guess. But reverse malware engineering is more advanced than malware analysis. It's really beyond the scope of this course, and it's beyond the scope of the CISA Plus exam. Maybe it's a good idea just to understand just a little bit, because malware analysis is expected while reverse engineering is not. But reverse engineering does include examining the binary code of malware. It also includes using debuggers, actually running code and using debuggers, native code, so you're looking at assembly language. And so you will have to understand at least some assembly or some assembly techniques. So you're looking at zeros and ones, you're looking at things like NOPs and other entry points and things of that nature. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's all speak in assembly language, so don't really worry about it. It's beyond the scope of this course, but it's something that you will need to learn if you want to further your career. You also really need to understand deep Windows API calls and how API works. And we also say you need to understand static analysis. Static analysis is basically looking at code for a debugger, looking at code when it's not running, so code review. So hopefully that gives you an idea of why you should set up a malware lab, at least a lab to analyze malware, because you will be able to do all these things that I'm talking about, plus much more when you have your own lab.